Welcome back, everybody, to the Philadelphia Eagles franchise here on Madden 22. Season number 4 is in the books. It was a really fun season for us as we ended up going 12-5, got the number 3 seed in the NFC, and almost made the Super Bowl, losing in the NFC Championship in the last episode to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in what ended up being a really competitive and exciting game, 28-24. The Bucs ended up demolishing the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, so Tom Brady now has 8 Super Bowl championships at the age of 48 now, I think, probably retiring into the sunset. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, though, because we're not hopping into the offseason. That'll actually be in the next episode. But today is going to be something that I did last year for the first time in Madden 21, and I'm excited to do it again. So what we're doing is sort of a league overview or a league recap. We're going to look at the very first 3 draft classes of this series, and we're going to go around looking at all the notable players who have been drafted and see how they've done so far. These teams have changed a lot through the past 4 years, and on our Eagles roster, the only 4 players who have been on the team since the start of this series are Devontae Smith, Fletcher Cox, Jason Kelce, and Landon Dickerson. None of those 4 players are under contract for next year as well. A very large chunk of our team has been players who have been drafted within the past 3 seasons. We know all of these guys well. We know how players like Nehemiah Richardson and Tykeem Keon and Jabari Achabe and Tazwell Hubbard have done. But what about all the notable picks around the league on the other 31 NFL teams? So we're finally going to see how those guys have done through their NFL careers. We're going to look at the first draft class, second draft class, and the third draft class, which was last year. We're going to do it by position. So we're going to start off with the quarterbacks who have been drafted throughout this series. And there are a number of interesting ones to this point. Obviously, we have one of the highly drafted quarterbacks in Xander Vanderwall, who, of course, was picked by the Steelers a couple of years ago, ended up being traded over to us. You guys know how his career has gone, so we're not really going to talk about him, but we're going to talk about all the guys down here. Currently, the highest-rated quarterback who has been drafted into this series is, fittingly, Malachi Madison, who was the number 1 overall pick in the year 1 draft by the Indianapolis Colts. He's a super talented player, but he just hasn't really put the pieces of a puzzle together in his 3 years in Indianapolis. The Colts have been pretty bad throughout this series. They were quite solid this year, going 10-7, missing out on the playoffs largely because of a loaded AFC. Madison's numbers are very unimpressive. He hasn't really improved through his first 3 seasons of his career, and with only 1 more year left on his deal, I'm not sure how willing the Colts are going to be on paying him big money. So Malachi Madison very well could be traded in this offseason if Indianapolis gets the right offer and feels like that he's been a disappointment. The only other first-round pick in the year 1 drafted quarterback was, of course, Xander Vanderwall, but again, we don't need to go over our players. Throughout that Season 1 draft, in the later rounds, there were a lot of really good quarterbacks taken. Jakari Johnson to the Lions was the 3rd quarterback off the board, and in my opinion, he's been the best one so far in this draft class. He has really helped shift the culture in Detroit and has been statistically impressive. The Lions were the only team in the NFC North not to make the playoffs this year, but Jakari Johnson's been really good, and he's going to get big money. Capricus Falconbridge is one of the most talented quarterbacks in this class, the only one with Superstar X Factor. He's got a rocket of an arm, but he just hasn't really been a winner yet for the Seattle Seahawks, who have been very up and down throughout this series. He had his best year of his career this year, but again, I'm not sure how willing Seattle will be on paying him. Later in that second round, we have Braylon DeBose-Durr to the Saints. He's just been very average so far. He hasn't been good. He hasn't been bad. He's been a very capable starter, and you can do a lot of things with capable starters, but he's also probably not someone who's going to win you a Super Bowl. He did have his best season this year, 35 touchdowns, 10 picks. I think 3 of those interceptions came against us late in the year. He did not play very well when they played us. The Saints also have Duke McCurdy, who was picked in the 2nd round last year, so they have a very interesting quarterback room. As we move to the 2nd draft in this series, of course, Anthony Cortez was picked very high by the Giants. I think he's the most talented quarterback who's been picked so far in this series. Of course, he has Superstar X Factor and is a really good explosive football player. The Giants are the Giants. They're a mess. They're about to have their 3rd head coach in 3 seasons with Cortez. His numbers don't jump off the page, but I do have a lot of faith that he's going to be really, really good going forward, and I don't love that he's in our division. The issue with Cortez's game is the consistency, or I guess lack thereof. His 2 performances against us this year show that. Week 2, passer rating of 146, 2 incompletions, 2 touchdowns. Their offense was great. 2 weeks later in Week 4, passer rating at 23, 2 interceptions, 0 points scored. And that was when our defense was on their really bad stretch. The other quarterback drafted in the first round of the Year 2's draft was Joe Kilpatrick by the Washington football team. Kilpatrick is a very different quarterback to Anthony Cortez in the sense that he doesn't win with physical traits, but he's a good game manager, and he's reliable. Think like a Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, not a guy who's going to win you a game, but not a guy who's going to lose you a game either. He hasn't been phenomenal so far, but he's been very respectable. After those two, again, plenty of notable quarterbacks in the mid-round, specifically Ricky RATZIVINSKY of the Tennessee Titans, who started for the first time this past season and was pretty good. He wasn't insane, but the Titans were a better team this year than they were a year ago, largely because of a solid season from RATZIVINSKY. The other notable quarterback drafted in Year 2 was CEECEE. He was a third-round pick by the Falcons, traded last year to the Broncos after Atlanta used their first-round pick on a quarterback. CEECEE hasn't really played, but his upside is sky high, and we almost traded for him last year. We opted for Xander Vanderwall instead, but once CEECEE gets an opportunity in Denver when Aaron Rodgers retires, he's going to be real good. Then we look at the Year 3 draft last year. Greg Waters-Key, of course, was the undoubted #1 pick until the Rams chose not to pick him #1, shocking the world with Coastal Carolina's Nico Cabanera. Cabanera was a huge mistake by the Rams picking him #1 overall. There's no denying it. This is like Ryan Leaf over Peyton Manning. However, statistically, Nico Cabanera was about as good this year as Greg Waters-Key. Cabanera was fine. He wasn't good, but he wasn't terrible either. And his numbers, as you'll see here, weren't really that much worse than Greg Waters-Key. He actually had a better passer rating than Waters-Key. Despite that, Greg Waters-Key is obviously the better player for the future. His numbers are really good. His stats look like he's going to be a star one day once he develops. He wasn't phenomenal this year in Miami, but the Dolphins don't have a lot around him except for Tyreek Hill. I get that Tyreek Hill's a stud, but other than him, their offense is very questionable, to say the least. Waters-Key's numbers aren't bad, but 59 completion percentage isn't great. I'm sure he'll get that up as he goes along. And I think Greg Waters-Key has a chance to be a star. Him, Anthony Cortez III, and Malachi Madison are the 3 generational quarterback talents who've been picked in this series. No, none of them have lived up to that generational status yet, but I think at least 2 of those 3 probably will end up being great QBs. After Nico and Waters-Key went in the top 2 last year, you may remember that there were 3 additional first-round quarterbacks, including Loco Onwualu, the Loco lefty, drafted by the Atlanta Falcons. This was a major surprise because Atlanta had just picked CeeCee in round 3 the year prior, but they really like the physical upside that Loco brings to the table. Atlanta's obviously an interesting spot because they were not good last year. They were really, really bad, not winning a game until the final week of the season when they somehow defeated the Giants. Atlanta holds the #1 pick in this year's draft, where they are expected to select Kentucky cornerback Bryson Barraclough. He is the best player in this draft, and although corner is not a huge need of theirs, when you're the #1 pick and you have a franchise quarterback, you just got to go BPA, and Barraclough's BPA. Bjorn Syverson was the 4th quarterback off the board of the Steelers last year, and among the rookies, he was by far the best, having a great season under offensive coordinator Pep Hamilton, throwing for 34 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, leading the Steelers to this 2 seed. Pittsburgh picking a quarterback last year was also a surprise because they had invested a top 10 pick in Xander Vanderwall, who eventually, of course, was traded to us. The other quarterback drafted last year was CALLUM Jupiter. I think CALLUM Jupiter would have been an Eagle had we not gone out and got Xander Vanderwall. CALLUM Jupiter is not going to be a superstar. He looks like a fine player, but he's nothing spectacular, and he had a pretty average rookie season, albeit on a bad Raiders supporting cast, but he doesn't really look like he's ever going to be great. So those are the quarterbacks who have been drafted in this series so far. Got some interesting storylines. How are guys like Cortez and Waters-Key going to develop? Is Bjorn Syverson going to keep this up? Is Malachi Madison going to get traded? We're not going to go as in-depth with the other positions because quarterback is so important, but we are going to move on to running back, where there are a lot of good ones. In my opinion, the 2 best have been, honestly, Tazewell Hubbard and Rosemont St. Clair, just because they complement each other so well in our backfield and are both so different but so good. But there are a number of other highly drafted running backs in this series who have developed into great players. In the very first draft, the New York Jets used the 6th overall pick on Matt Miller. Tazewell Hubbard's longtime college running mate has been a really good player for the Jets in his own right. Miller took a little bit to get going, but this past season in year 3 of his career, he was really good. Unfortunately for him, he plays on the Jets, and, well, the Jets are the Jets. But Matt Miller's a really, really good player, running for over 1,300 yards this past season and 11 touchdowns. He is looking like a stud. He was not the only first-round running back that year, as the Cardinals traded up to select Omega Morris. He has also been quite solid. Morris is your traditional power thumping back. He's pretty much a poor man's Derrick Henry. I feel like the Cardinals haven't perfectly utilized him because they still have James Conner, but Morris has been highly productive so far in his career with the Arizona Cardinals, and with James Conner probably not going to be on the team next year, he'll have a bigger role. In the year 2 draft, the Lions used the #1 overall pick on LSU's Osiris Jefferson, who's a polarizing player. He's a 91 overall. He's 22 years old, but he has normal dev. Jefferson won Offensive Rookie of the Year as a rookie. He was fantastic. This past season, he took a small step down, but was still really good. So clearly, having normal development hasn't really hindered him at all, because he's a stud. 1,500 yards as a rookie, 1,269, nice, this past year. The Lions have a great offensive duo with Osiris Jefferson and Jakari Johnson, but there's more to this Detroit offense, as you'll see in a minute. Wide receiver, I think the best one so far, unbiasedly, has been Tykeem Keon, where he has been great for our Eagles, but Keon was the second receiver off the board in year 1. The first was Zayden Savage of the Lions. We thought about Zayden Savage heavily with the 3rd pick that year. We ended up going with Nehemiah Richardson. Although I think we made the right choice, Zayden Savage has been a great player in his own right. Savage is a 97 overall, making him the highest drafted player in this entire series so far. He's coming off the best year of his career, 97 catches, 1,100 yards, and 10 touchdowns. He is going to be a legit wide receiver 1 for a long time. And oh yeah, he's only 23 years old next year. He's 2 years younger than Tykeem Keon. In my opinion, the best drafted player, regardless of position so far in this series, has been Maurice Rodgers of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Rodgers was a good player in college for us at Westlake, but he was never a superstar. In the NFL, since he has stepped onto the field, he has been a superstar. He has been Tom Brady's #1 receiver. He was drafted once Chris Godwin left, and as you can tell by the numbers, he's been real good. This past season, 112 catches, 1,400 yards, 14 touchdowns. He's a total beast. Having Tom Brady throwing you the ball helps, but Maurice Rodgers has also, in part, made Tom Brady better. Rodgers was not the only Westlake receiver drafted in the first draft when the Jaguars used a day 2 pick on the speedster Kadarius Franklin. Franklin is not the biggest, but he is an absolute burner. Look at him outrunning Budda Baker here. And Kadarius Franklin's been a good player in his own right. He's been the Jaguars' slot receiver for the most part, and he's been highly productive. He's coming off the best year of his career, his first 1,000-yard season as a pro. And him and Trevor Lawrence have been a really nice duo in Jacksonville. The Jaguars have so many weapons. They have DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault, Kadarius Franklin, Kyle Pitts. That offense is loaded. Another Westlake wide receiver picked in the year 1 draft was CHET KUCHARSKI of the Dallas Cowboys. He's also been really good, and whenever the Dallas Cowboys play us, he's always really good. In the playoff game this year, he had over 100 yards. He's a stud. With Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb on the outside, CHET KUCHARSKI's the perfect slot piece, and he's one of few players in this series who can say that they have a Super Bowl ring. We have another Westlake receiver drafted in year 1. It's Josiah Mendez. Keep in mind, Westlake was always a 4 wide receiver team. That's how we have so many good receivers out of Westlake. Josiah Mendez is not as good as the first 3 we named, but he's been a really good #2 for New England alongside Odell Beckham. He's been very consistent in his career. Never a great player, but overall pretty solid. The second draft in this series, Westlake had a top 10 pick at wide receiver in Isaiah Thomas III. Thomas was a superstar in college, and he has been a superstar at the next level. Maybe not quite as good as Maurice Rodgers, but Isaiah Thomas III is a legit top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. Him and Jordan Love are a great duo. Thomas was maybe the best receiver in the league as a rookie. Took a small step down this past season, but was still a Pro Bowl caliber player. 24 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons, 1,280 yards as a rookie, 1,283 this year. And the Packers used their first-round pick this year on another Westlake receiver in Dominic Porter. Porter's not the player that Isaiah Thomas III is, but he's highly respectable with over 900 yards as a rookie on 69 catches. Nice. Porter and Thomas, like in college, are a great duo in the NFL. The top receiver drafted last year was Money Motique of the Minnesota Vikings, the #7 overall pick. The Minnesota Vikings kind of surpassed expectations this season. They even won a playoff game. But Money Motique was actually pretty disappointing. His numbers were worse than our second-round wide receiver, JT DeMarco. Motique only had over 500 yards on 39 catches. He wasn't injured or anything. I'm confident he's going to be a very good player at the next level, but he was quiet as a rookie. there are not a ton of notable tight ends. The highest drafted one so far was Lamar Gallagher of the Cowboys. He's had a little trouble staying on the field with injuries and whatnot, but he is a really talented player. You've got other guys like Santiago Cunningham, CORTEZ Ricks. Ricks and Gallagher are the only 2 first-round tight ends in this series. We're not going to go into too much detail about the offensive line, but there are a lot of good ones. Enegba Nwigwe was a top 5 pick by the Dolphins. He's really good. John Thompson has been the blind-side blocker of Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. He's been very solid. Antonio Osborne, another former Westlake lineman. We almost drafted him back in year 2. He instead went to Seattle, where he's been pretty solid for the most part. Ivan Bell was a top 10 pick in year 1, played right tackle at Duke, moved over to the left side in the NFL, where he's been solid. Valescu Markovitsi is one of the highest rated offensive linemen so far, as an 88 overall to the New Orleans Saints, another player we almost drafted. Frankie Bernard-SWITTON was a highly drafted guard last year, so was Kingsley Gore. Both of them are 80+ with star dev. Freddie CHEESEBURGER as well, another first-round guard of the Dolphins, 6'9", nice, 400 pounds. He's a 79 overall. The highest drafted center was Elton Smith in the first round by the Bengals a few years ago, only normal dev, but he's a highly productive starter for them. The highest rated offensive line drafted in the entire series is Kyle Harris, who's a 91 with the Chargers. He has superstar development as well. James Harlow was a top 10 pick by the Bucs last year. I didn't really agree with the pick at the time, but the Bucs won the Super Bowl, so you can't really question them. Bentley McVaughan, highly drafted tackle a couple years ago by the Titans. Pretty solid player there at right tackle. So yeah, we've had a number of talented offensive linemen into the series as we now move over to the defensive side of the ball, starting with the pass rushers. In the year 1 draft, Jaquarian Alabaster III was a first-round pick by the Las Vegas Raiders, and he has been really good up to this point. Alabaster was drafted to replace Clelin Ferrell, who they had just traded to us right before the draft. I think that web of moves was good for everybody. Alabaster's coming off a 13-sack season, and Clelin Ferrell's been a good player for our Eagles. The Raiders are really excited about having an X-Factor pass rusher going forward, and the same can be said for the Indianapolis Colts with Coleman Rasmussen, who they picked in the 4th round last year. We knew Rasmussen had the talent to be great. It's just a matter of him being such a polarizing prospect with the off-field character concerns that we talked about last year. He didn't do a whole lot as a rookie, but with Superstar X-Factor, he's got a chance to be really good. And he's actually better than Demetri Gardner, who was the number 4 overall pick last year. Gardner was the top defensive lineman picked, but for most of the year, he wasn't projected to be the top defensive lineman picked. That was Carleek McAllister, who at one point was going to be the top non-quarterback off the board last year, but his stock did slip a little bit towards the end of the season. Still ended up going in the top 10. Had a fairly quiet rookie season with only 2.5 sacks, but again, I'm sure that he will be a good player in due time, already in the 80s with star dev. Russell Ingram Jr. has developed nicely with the Titans, but statistically he's been pretty underwhelming. He has under 10 sacks in his first 3 seasons of his career and hasn't been the player that we all thought. I remember during the Season 1 draft live stream, everybody wanted me to pick him over Tykeem Keon, and I think it's fair to say we made the right pick, drafting an all-pro caliber wide receiver over Ingram, who has 9 career sacks. With that number 3 overall pick in the first draft, I almost drafted Akabuizi Uchichi of the Minnesota Vikings. It was going to be either him, Zayden Savage, or Nehemiah Richardson. Again, I think we made the right choice, but Zayden Savage and Uchichi have been good players in their own right. Uchichi has averaged 15 tackles per loss per season, and he had 9 sacks this past year. He's developed into a great player with the Vikings, but he's not the only great defensive tackle in that year 1 class. Leopoldo Monteverde of the Baltimore Ravens is also really, really good. He just screams, Baltimore Raven. This is the type of guy who is a little bit more raw coming out, had some developing to do, but here in year 3 as a full-time starter, he's been quite good. 11 tackles for loss, 8 sacks. In the second draft, K.K. Mosley-Smith was the top defensive tackle off the board out of Pitt. Only has normal dev, but he's a very solid player in his own right. The Saints do have a pretty crowded interior defensive line with other talented players like David Onyemata and Noel Payne, former Westlake Hornet. So because of that, Mosley-Smith hasn't really gotten to show a whole lot with only 1.5 sacks to his name. As for Noel Payne, he's done a little bit more in his career. Payne has gotten a double-digit tackles per loss in each of his first 3 seasons and is coming off a career high in sacks with 6. The Falcons also have a fun defensive tackle duo featuring Sheldon House, who was always a very reliable player in college, was never a great player, but was always very solid, and he's been that in the NFL. His stats were actually his best as a rookie, and they have gone down a little bit these past couple of seasons, so we'll see what he's able to do in a contract year. Next to House, the Falcons have Benny Wilkins, who at 6'11", 400 pounds, is certainly a big human being. He makes these offensive linemen look small. I mean, he is just a gargantuan of a man going after the quarterback as he sacks Jalen Hurts there of the Panthers. Wilkins' numbers throughout his career are unimpressive, but he does have the physical upside to be very, very good in due time, and with that superstar development, I could see it happening. The last defensive tackle we're going to talk about is Niles Onwualu of the Houston Texans. He's coming off a strong rookie season. We almost drafted Onwualu last year. I really thought about it, but obviously I opted for Edmond Orient instead. Although Onwualu probably could have made a bigger impact than Orient as a rookie, I do feel good about that pick because I'm very high on Edmond Orient for the future. Moving on to the linebacker position, we start with another former Westlake Hornet. It's Thomas Hagen of the Seahawks. Back in college, I was really impressed with just how smart this kid is. He has phenomenal instincts, and so far in the pros, he's been all right with the Seahawks. Nothing too crazy, but he's been very respectable. This was his first full-time season as a starter, and he's been pretty solid. The Panthers have middle linebacker Lou Bartz-Roy, who has been their Luke Kuechly replacement. Lou Bartz-Roy is one of my all-time favorite Westlake Hornets. He's just such a fun player, from his spectacular interceptions to his super hard hits. He hasn't been a star yet in the NFL, but he has been a good player. 108 tackles, 3 interceptions this past season. I'm very excited to see how he can improve to the third season of his career with Carolina. Nigel Combs was a player we looked at back in Season 1. He was drafted 1 selection before Tykeem Keon. Combs has been all right. Nothing spectacular, but he's been a very quality starter for the Giants the past couple of seasons, and is, of course, entering a contract year. He's coming off a career high in tackles, tackles for loss, and sacks, and has been able to make a nice boost throughout his career. The Raiders have another X-Factor pass rusher in MUSAFA YAHYA, who was a top pick last year, the number 3 overall pick out of North Carolina. His younger brother, Zahir YAHYA, is a pass rusher out of Ohio State, who is also projected to go in the top 3 this year. MUSAFA did not record a sack as a rookie. I think the Raiders mostly played him off ball for whatever reason, but I'll make sure he's actually going after the quarterback next season. Emmanuel Toussaint was Washington's first-round pick in year 1. He hasn't been a great player, but he has been very solid as a capable starter these past 3 seasons for the Commanders. Coming off a career high in tackles and tackles for loss, but he only has 3.5 sacks in his career. Again, I wish they used him a little bit less off ball and more as a pass rusher. We talked about how Leopoldo Montverde is the very typical Baltimore Ravens pick. Well, so is Osvaldo Sapp. He was a very raw pass rusher coming out, projected to go in the 2nd round. Baltimore picked him in the 1st round, and he has developed pretty nicely. He hasn't really improved his sack number, actually going down from his rookie season, but he has shown flashes in 2 years with the Ravens that he could be pretty good. Devontae Bowie of the Rams has had a very weird career trajectory. In year 1, he was solid, and then in year 2, he sort of burst onto the scene, recording 13.5 sacks. This past year, he did take a step down, largely because of no Aaron Donald anymore. But if I were to guess, he probably has more sacks than anybody who's been drafted in this series. Gordon Waters-Key is the slightly older brother of Greg Waters-Key. He's more of a coverage linebacker for the Jets, but he can do a little bit of everything. He's been pretty serviceable through his first 2 seasons, finally got an opportunity to start this year where he was pretty solid, and he'll be continuing to get an increased role throughout his career. Now we move to the secondary. The highest rated defensive back drafted in this series is Nehemiah Richardson. No real surprise there. Again, we already know a lot about him because he's on our team. Richardson was not the top corner picked in his class. It was actually Rube Rowley who was the 2nd overall pick. Rowley's only a 71 overall. He's not that great. He hasn't really gotten an opportunity to play that much. He does have star dev, and he has really good ball skills, but only 19 tackles and 1 interception. He just hasn't really gotten a chance to play. In year 2, Jalen Duggs Beckham from Oregon was a highly regarded cornerback prospect. He ended up going in the top 5. I actually said he was a better prospect than Nehemiah Richardson, who was drafted the year before. Looking at the numbers, I think Richardson's been the better player so far than Jalen Duggs Beckham, but there's still a lot of reason to be optimistic with him. Gogurt Spiffy was the elite cornerback prospect last year. He is 99 catching, only coming in with star dev, so he doesn't have superstar X factor like Jalen Duggs Beckham for the Jets or Nehemiah Richardson for our team. But 99 catching's a big deal, and Gogurt Spiffy probably has better ball skills than anybody in the NFL right now. He only had 1 interception last year, but I am fully expecting him to be an interception machine as his career goes along. Justin Graves, another year 1 draft pick corner. He has 99 speed, acceleration, agility, and jumping. He's a freak athlete, and I wish the Falcons used him a little bit more offensively, but he is a very solid corner. He was really inconsistent throughout his college career, but we always knew the talent was there. He was the #1 player in his recruiting class, and he's been pretty solid for Atlanta. Only 2 career interceptions, but he has improved in coverage each season. Another former first-round corner out of Westlake is Khalil Onabanjo, who plays for the Jaguars. He's not the biggest guy, 5'11", 177, but he is a playmaker. Great ball skills. He was a phenomenal corner in college, leading him to be a top 15 selection in his draft class. He was the 2nd corner off the board behind Jalen Duggs Beckham in that year 2 draft. And although he has not recorded an interception, I know he had an interception in the highlight, but who cares? The Defensive Rookie of the Year of his past season was Shock Sanders of the Rams. He was their, I believe, 2nd-round pick. The Rams had 3 first-rounders last year. They also had a high 2nd-rounder, which was used on Shock Sanders, who had 2 interceptions as a rookie, leading him to win the Defensive Rookie of the Year award. With no more Jalen Ramsey, he projects to be Los Angeles' #1 corner for many years to come. We're going to wrap up this video at the safety position. The highest free safety who's been picked is actually Edmund Orient, who was only just picked last year. Right behind him, we have Florentino Phoenix of the Denver Broncos. Phoenix was a top 10 pick back in year 1. This is the brother of Eagles kicker Zebediah Phoenix II. Florentino Phoenix has not lived up to that top 10 hype. His morale is a little bit low, so maybe he wants to trade out of Denver. I don't think we're going to get him because we don't really need a safety. He did have 4 interceptions his 2nd year, but he had none last year. At strong safety, the highest rated player here, again, is a player from last year's draft class in Salem Newport, who is Superstar X Factor. The Falcons had 2 first-round picks last year, one of which was for quarterback Loco Onwualu, the other was Salem Newport. They got this pick from the CEECEE trade with the Denver Broncos. Newport had a pretty good rookie year and looks to be a stalwart on the Atlanta defense for years to come. In the year 1 draft, the Packers' first rounder was Ifeanyichukwu Nachukwu out of South Carolina. He's more of a hybrid type of player, sub-linebacker who can also play safety, and he's been highly respectable for Green Bay. The Packers have hit on all 3 of their first-round picks in this series, with Nachukwu in year 1 and the 2 Westlake receivers Isaiah Thomas and Dominic Porter the next 2 seasons. The final player we're going to look at today is Chargers safety Fabian Suggs, who was picked in the top 5 of his draft a couple years ago. He's technically behind Derwin James on the depth chart, but he has been been used as a chess piece for the Chargers defense, playing slot corner, sub-linebacker. He's really done it all, and he's been a highly productive player, getting more snaps this year and making some solid improvements in year 2. I'm excited to see what he does in the 3rd year of his career. So that's going to wrap it up. Let me know what you thought about this style of video. It definitely took me a while to make, but it was really fun to see how all of these guys are doing. We followed all of these players when they were in college with their prospect profiles, and it's good to see that most of them, at least, are having strong careers in the NFL. So that's going to wrap up today's episode. Next time, we're going to kick off the offseason with free agency. We're also going to do re-signs, coaching changes, trades, all that fun stuff. It's going to be a big episode, and then after that, we've got the draft preview, and then the NFL draft itself. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Peace out.